Before the next episode of X Job Downloaded starts, I have a big favour to ask. If you've enjoyed any of our episodes so far, please can you click on the follow button on your platform. I'm on Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon and YouTube. It costs nothing to follow, but makes a real difference to me as a podcast producer. Thank you. My name is Paul Maleary, and for 30 years I served with Essex Police. During this time I interviewed suspects for murder, abduction, rape and extortion, plus a variety of other crimes. Now I interview former police and military personnel and anybody else who has an interesting story to tell. Sit back and listen to X Job Downloaded. This interview is being tape recorded. My name is Paul Maleary and this is X Job Downloaded. And today I'm going to interview former Metropolitan Police Officer Richard Keil. Now, Richard served 30 years for the Metropolitan Police and today he's in private industry. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, Paul. How you doing?
I'm good, mate. Thanks ever so much for taking part in this. We've already had a bit of a chat and there's a few common threads in our lives. But where did it all begin for you and what was your inspiration for joining the Metropolitan Police?
You know, it's I can remember me wanting to be a policeman from probably the age of 10, 11 years of age. My mum and dad didn't want me to be a cop, and I didn't really know much about the Met Police at the time, and so I sort of followed Essex Police in reality, and I did all right in my exams at school. My teachers wanted me to stay and do A-levels, but I just wanted to be a cop, and I just didn't see the point. I just really wanted to be a policeman. I think the bill at the time, the programme came out. And you saw that, I thought, yeah, I quite fancy that. And then, and basically I applied for a college course in Chelmsford that did policing. It wasn't in the police, but it was a policing course at the college. I think it's Civic, I think the college was called. And I didn't pass the entrance test and I was absolutely devastated. And I always remember my mum saying to me, like, everything happens for a reason. Yeah. And my sister started going out with a cop from the Met Police and she's married to him now. And he was a cadet and he told me about the Metropolitan Police Cadets, which at the time was a full-time job. And so I looked into it. I went and worked in London for a year at a bank called Standard Chartered because I wasn't quite old enough then, and just shy of 80, about 17 and 3/4, I was able to apply and join the Metropolitan Police Cadets, which then I left home and that was it. I was up at the Cadets for a year. And at that time it was, I think like as well it is at the moment, the Met was struggling to recruit. So they run the cadet school to get people from all around the country. And my best friend from the police is a guy that comes from a small village near Edinburgh. Right. And I got that, and it was probably one of the best years of my life. You know, you're away from home. It was a bit like being in the army. You're in a dormitory with 6 other people. And yeah, it was a group of about 25 of us went through the year together. And then when you finished that, you passed out, and in essence, you were guaranteed to go to the other end of Hendon and joined the job proper, which I did on the 16th of October 1989.
Wow. So what sort of stuff did you do in the cadets?
It was sort of structured around sort of 8-week block modules where you joined and you sort of did your basic training. We went to Wales and did some rock climbing and stuff like that, canoeing. And then you did sort of lessons, because obviously a lot of these people were from places where they'd never ever been to London. You know, my friend from Scotland. So you did sort of lessons around London and understanding London, the community, different parts of it where you were going to work. You did about 8 weeks of sort of lessons. And then for the next 8 weeks, you went out on community sort of service. So I worked in a boys club in South London, which was really eye-opening, sort of at 17, 18 years of age. I think it's called Repton Boys Club. It was Southwark. I don't know if it's still there now, but that's something that I think needs to be rethought. It was a club which had a swimming pool at the top, 5-a-side football pitches in it. You'd never known from the outside, snooker tables, and it was basically a place for the youth of that area to come and sort of do stuff, because you take it for granted when you live in places like we do. Yeah. Football pitches are there, but when you come from Southwark, there isn't football pitches, there isn't swimming pools, there isn't these sort of distraction things that people can do. And I don't know whether it's still there, but yeah. So basically I went out to that, and then you come back to Hendon and do another sort of 8 weeks of the schoolwork, and then I went out to Plaistow Hospital, which was an old people's place at the time, and just working with old people. I can remember being the bingo caller and singing songs with them, stuff like that. So I think it was just a case of going out and doing stuff like that. And then in between that, you did what's called basic Wales and advanced Wales. So you went to Wales again, and then at Wales at the end, and then in between you were doing marching. When you passed out, you had to do this big demonstration of marching. And yeah, it was just I'll tell you what, if they did it today, I'd recommend it to anyone. I think it was great.
What did your mum and dad say? Because bear in mind, they didn't want you to join the police. What did they say when they saw you do all these great things?
Well, do you know what? My mum and dad didn't want me to be. I'll be honest. Not many parents would want their kids to join the police because it's dangerous, as I well know, and I know you know that, you know. And but ultimately, they knew I wanted to do it. And my dad said to me once, you know, you've got to do something you enjoy. That's the most important thing about work. And I'd say it to anyone: do something that you're going to enjoy, because you're going to do it for a long time. And I knew I was never going to be a millionaire, but listen, I'll do all right. But I absolutely loved my 30 years in the police. Absolutely loved it. I did a lot of different jobs. And if I went back, I'd do it all again.
Yeah, me too, mate.
Without a doubt, I'd do it all again.
I think I'd change some of the politics or some of the politicians that were in charge of me. But then that's my fault, because actually I should have probably got promoted earlier instead of waiting for as long as I did. But I was having too much fun. And that way you can't influence anything if you're on the bottom. If anybody's listening to this and you just joined the police, get your bloody exams, because that's the only way you're going to make any changes.
But I mean, there's something I was going to say about it is I think there's an air today that people join and they want to get promoted straight away.
Oh, yeah.
And I think you have to. I mean, I got promoted to sergeant, 18 years service, and I did some great jobs in between that. And it's harder to get on specialisms when you're promoted.
Yeah.
For a start, and it's easier as a as a PC. But ultimately, I learned off of the leaders that led me about what I wanted to pick out of good leaders, what I thought would work, what didn't work. And then, you know, the answer is, as I say to people, if you don't like it, get promoted and do it your way. Don't moan about it.
Yeah.
Do it your way.
Yeah, it's interesting because we joined around a similar time, but the people that came before us, and Steve Reynolds, who's a guy whose podcast was out the other week, he passed his exams within a couple of years of joining, because you could do even though you haven't been promoted, you could do your sergeants. If you pass that, you could then do your inspectors. So it gave you the opportunity. So, but it is difficult. It's a difficult job now. I think it's always been difficult, and it's always been dangerous, but it is particularly difficult at the moment.
I think, you know, there's something I say to people, you know, I'd never criticise the police, no matter what. I'd always recommend it to people. And I can remember being on the TSG. I mean, we'll probably talk about that in a minute. I was on a thing called the Territorial Support Group at 22 years of age in 1993, working with guys that joined the job in the 70s.
Yeah. And
bear in mind that I joined the police like yourself 5 years after PACE came in. And PACE is now a distant memory to people, 1984. But I had people on the carrier joining in the 70s going, we used to be able to do this, we used to be able to do that. And so throughout your service, it's always transitioning. So the job changes, and it will, and you always seem to remember those rose-tinted times. It's always brilliant. But it's not. It's the good old days. It's always been tough. It's always been a tough job, and it's had to sort of develop over the years because crime's changed.
Of course it is.
Paul, we joined a job where we were taught to deal with crime. Yeah. We were taught to nick bad people. Today, what I say to people, the things that didn't take up a lot of our time in the early 90s and the late 80s take up a lot of time now, like domestic violence. And quite rightly, because it's quite a big thing, you know, and in our day, it was no one ever knew about it, was it? We'd go around, all right, you two, if you have to come back here, someone's going to get arrested, and we left it. Missing people was another thing.
Yeah.
You know, it didn't take up a lot of time. Now it takes up an infinite amount of time dealing with missing because of the risk involved.
With fewer people, in real terms.
With fewer people. And phoning the police is so easy to do now because we've got these things in our hand called mobile phones that we didn't have.
Yeah. And
this is what people don't realise. And those mobile phones have made crime develop as well, like harassment for social media, all these things that didn't exist when we joined.
Yeah.
So people go, we can do this. But actually, they don't realise that all these crimes have developed through the use of technology that the police has got to try and keep up with, which is not easy.
It's even harder when there hasn't been a growth in police numbers. I mean, if you think about it, if you see somebody's mobile phone, there's more data on that mobile phone than there was in the computer that put men on the moon. And that's the reality about it. But where did you go to? So you pass out from Hendon. You've done your training there. Where did you go to first?
I started at a police station called Lehman Street in the East End, which is right on the edge of the city, which is now the SO19, CO19. I'm not sure what they call it now. It's now the firearms base, but in those days it was divisional policing, and we were part of H Division, and H Division had Bethnal Green, Lehman Street, and Limehouse as part of the division.
It was a fabulous area.
Oh, it was. It was really small. It was a mile. I think it was a mile and a half long down to the Blackwall Tunnel, the Rotherhithe Tunnel. It went down to the Rotherhithe Tunnel, and it went from the commercial road down to Wapping. And it was sort of talking the Whitechapel Hospital. And Wapping at the time was an area that was being developed. Yeah. I mean, if I tell you now, I could have bought a house in Wapping for about, a flat for about £30,000. And policemen did live in Wapping. And Wapping was a bit of a, people weren't moving there. Being in all these lovely places, people were still a bit unsure about moving there. So they did start doing some social housing there. But some of the places, I mean, I remember going to an alarm, and it was the guy out of the band Europe, The Final Countdown.
Oh, really?
It was a central station hold-up alarm at his house, and we went to this penthouse flat. Oh, it's amazing. We had an observatory in the roof and things like that. So, but then you went the other way up towards sort of Brick Lane, and we took in Commercial Street, which was Spitalfields Market, which was Spitalfields Market as people knew it before it moved out. It was a market, and that had issues with prostitution, like that area of London has always had since Jack the Ripper times. Big problems with prostitution because of the lorry drivers coming in, transient people coming in, and it was just a real eclectic mix of people. You had the mosque there, the Whitechapel Mosque there, a lot of Bangladeshi residents there. It was just do you know what? There's some times in the job, and I don't know what it is when you first join the job, that first team you go and you still stay in contact with those people. Yeah. And we still do. I still do keep in contact with some of those people. It's just a great time, I'm going to say it. Policing was quite easy.
Oh yeah, it was. Yeah, absolutely. You had Cable Street there, didn't you? As well. That was part of yours, and people don't realise that the Battle of Cable Street, which is goes back eons. That was big noise then. But you had the Mosley stuff as well, didn't you? So that was all around there. Back in the 1930s, the black shirts and what have you, that was all.
And then even going forth from that, Paul, you had the Wapping disputes with some printworks. That was a big thing just before I joined there, the Wapping printworks. And you walk down that, when I can remember walking down that area, and there was railings with like the sort of spear type tops, and where they'd been cut off, you could see in the rain, they'd been cut off and thrown at police during those riots.
Wow.
And we had the Tower of London. We used to do Tower Hill Patrol. That was one of the things we used to do. And making sure the ice cream vans weren't obstructing the highway, which is another thing. But we used to walk a lot. Yeah. We were out walking all the time. And I always remember being 19 years of age, walking on nights. So if you did a night duty week, it used to be a week of nights, you were lucky if you were walking like less than 3 nights. 3 or 4 out of the 7, you'd be walking on your own.
Yeah.
And I can remember walking down the back of the Whitechapel Hospital, looking through a window with all the lights on where the nurses were walking, and thinking, I'm stood here in a tunic. I've got a bit of wood down my leg. Yeah. I'm 19. If someone jumps out on me, I think I'm going to run.
Run away.
It was quite scary. I was the thing was, they're younger than my kids now.
Yeah.
I've got a boy who's 21. I'm thinking, I can't imagine him doing that at 19.
And you can see why our parents used to worry. But but it's character building, isn't it? Where did you go? So you're at Lehman Street. Where did you go to from there?
So from there, one of up the road in Bow was the Territorial Support Group, which, if people don't know what that is, it's the riot police. In essence, you drive around in, at the time, were British Leyland Sherpa vans, and you dealt with public order. And when you weren't dealing with public order, you were a support function to the boroughs or the divisions. Like they'd say, right, we've got a problem, can you come in and help us out? And we'd all go down there and spend a month or so on a particular borough or division dealing with their local problems. And it's something I always wanted to do. you know, and I applied for it young. I was one of the youngest to get it. I remember we applied and there was about 30 odd people got it, and they did it in age order. And there was myself, and I always remember Pete Sparks, who ended up, I think Chief Super Pete did, I think. Top man he is.
I know Pete. I think he got the QPM for the
Yes, he did.
He got the QPM for the deaths in the back of the lorry, the Vietnamese people.
It might, but he was a family liaison. He did family liaison quite a lot, and
I'm pretty sure.
But I remember Pete was young. He was like me. He was young, and we were the last two of this big long list of people. I think we waited a year or 2 years, and I had a really good inspector at Lehman Street at the time, Mr. Kennedy. I can't remember his first name. Really top guy, Scottish guy. And he didn't want me to go to the TSG because I was quite proactive. That was the thing at the time. I like to nick people and put people out. But that's how you got onto things like the TSG. And he said to me, "Oh, Keil, what about if I give you a driving course? Will you stay?" Because he knew I'd had to. And I didn't. I just wanted to go on the TSG. And I'm glad I didn't do that. And people do stay because they want to get driving. And it's harder now to get driving courses. Yeah. But I just wanted to be on TSG. And then I got all my courses through the TSG, my carrier course and initial standard course. And went on to do advanced when I was a surveillance officer. So yeah, I applied for it, got it, and then waited in an age to actually join it. And it would be 93, I think it was March 1993 that I joined.
Wow. Steve Graysmark on that unit?
Yes, he was. Steve Graysmark was a skipper on it. Yes, he was. He went on to be, Steve, he was certainly a chief inspector. I think he went to be a superintendent.
He was superintendent in Essex. He was my boss.
Yeah, good guy.
I out with him for breakfast. I will send him the link for this podcast. We used to go out for breakfast most days.
Yeah, I was a fresh-faced 22-year-old. Steve Graysmark was a skipper on there. That TSG at that time had some unbelievable cops on it. Yeah, you know, some great thief takers, just good people who were good cops. Really, I learned such a lot on the TSG at that time.
Did you get deployed much from TSG for public order events?
Oh yeah, in those days, we used to go to Hounslow to do our training. So every month you were doing public order training, which used to make me laugh. They ended up having to make us go down there on a coach because we used to travel down in the carriers. Yeah. And on the way down there, people would end up nicking people and not going to public order training because nobody really liked it. It was, but yeah, so we did, any sort of big public order instance we did. I can remember doing big Park Lane demonstration back in those times when poll tax was quite a big thing, the poll tax riots in Trafalgar Square and all that sort of stuff. That was literally just as I joined the Trafalgar Square. So I said my brother-in-law was in the job and he was policing that public order event. And it was a time there was quite a lot of public. I know there is now. There's always public order, but a lot of proper public order events, where you had to go and deal with things. And I remember doing the bookshop in Kent, the right-wing bookshop. Welling in Kent. There was stuff there, and yeah. So we regularly, and in football as well there was a lot of trouble at football at the time, and we would do West Ham quite a lot because obviously it was on the ground. And there was quite a big policing presence at football. It wasn't so much stewarded. We were in the ground. Yeah. And that's changed over the years where they've now employed stewards to deal with it. And the police are very much a periphery role out there on the outer skirts of it.
Yeah, well, because the clubs only pay now if they're deployed inside the ground.
Yeah, yeah.
So that, it keeps the cost down for the clubs. But yeah, we never used to do those sorts of things, but we used to do mutual aid with the Met, and that was always good fun. And the TSG, SPG previous to that, they're a good solid bunch of people that get stuck in.
Well, what I've always said to people is if you go, it's sort of a natural progression. You go to something like the TSG, you learn a lot about how to police a wide variety of things because you're dealing with various different areas. You're not on one particular area. As in like Lehman Street area or Bethnal Green, we were doing the whole of 3 area, and you do obviously aid centrally. So you're doing the whole of London. And if there's an incident, we used to have a thing called Commissioner's Reserve, which was 1, 3 and 20. You had to have minimum strengths 1, 3 and 21. And you were basically on call for anything that happened in London. So you could be sent to any part of London to deal with things. So a lot of the people that I work with on the TSG went on to do surveillance, firearms, close protection, lot of the specialist roles, and it's sort of a grounding to going on to specialism, in my opinion. I think it still is today.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Going back to Hounslow, I always remember going to Hounslow because we used to go training there. And there was the Met Boxing Club used to do their training there. And it was just a town on its own, wasn't it? I mean, you had the underground or the tube. I mean, bear in mind, we didn't get Epping until we didn't get the Met part of Essex until 2000. So the chances of us having to go and clear a carriage on a tube were quite remote. But you had to go and do that there, and it was good fun though. It was good fun. And then we ended up going to down in Kent, not Gravesend.
Gravesend?
Lydd.
Oh, Lydd. God.
What a place that was.
Yeah. I forgot about Lydd.
Yeah, Lydd. That was terrible. Yeah. Just had a smell about it, and it wasn't good for the barracks, the whole lot. It was just a terrible place. But again, as I say, it was character building.
Yeah.
Want to leave the TSG though?
Well, I did when I was on the TSG. They used to do surveillance,
right.
Really basic surveillance, and it's something that I found I enjoyed. And then if you were sort of identified as being good at it, I don't want to blow much up, but being okay at it.
Yeah.
You then got what was at the time called a P9 course, which was the surveillance P9 course, which was the official surveillance training course, because we used surveillance again. Ripper came in 2000. The how surveillance is sort of overseen, and we could just say, we're just going to follow that person, and we're just going to do a foot follow, and we don't have to be trained, and we can do what we want. And it was very sort of, it was a strange way of doing surveillance, but we sort of got taught by the P9 trained people, and if you were good at it, you then got a P9 course, and you then did the training, which then opened the doors to move into higher levels of surveillance.
Right.
So that's what I did, and in the TSG at the time, you did sort of 3 month stints at it. And that was a great time as well. Jerry Campbell, if he ever watches this, top skipper. He went on to be a chief super. Brilliant cop. Run that surveillance team. We had some really, really good people. Tim Gray, Darryl with my brother-in-law was on it. Darren McGuire. Loads of really, really good people who you may or may not know. They sort of all lived Essexy way because we were TSG. Just some great jobs we took. And what we were doing in essence, Paul, is we were dealing with a low-level crime. And that's something today that I think we've got a real problem in. People walking into a shop, picking up stuff, not even hiding their face, and walking out, and there's no implications from it. And that was the sort of thing that was being done proactively at the time. All this low-level stuff, I think there's a well-known phrase like 80% of crime is committed by 10% of the people. And if you take out the 10% of the people, you'll solve 80% of the crime.
Absolutely right.
And it was just a good time, which opened doors to other levels of surveillance, and and I went on to join what was called at the time FIB. It was area surveillance. It was you had the TSG, then you had area surveillance. Each area, and there was 8 areas at the time, had their own surveillance capability, and then above that you had what was called SO11, which was CO11 before that, and I think it's called MO3 now or something like that. But ultimately they were the armed surveillance. So I went through all 3 levels of that. I went from TSG, I did the FIB from 98 to 2002, which I was based at Nottingdale right in central London. Again, worked with some unbelievable people that I don't, Ian Pendry, John Ryan, my skipper, really respect John. Taught me a lot about management, how to manage people. Ali Johnson. I know they're just brilliant, unbelievable surveillance officers. And then sort of I moved on after that into the top level where I was an armed surveillance operative.
What was that like?
Yeah. I went. The course was the hardest thing I've ever done.
Right.
I failed it the first time. I can remember the stats. There was about 120 people applied for 12 places on a course, and 4 got it on the first course. I mean, it was minuscule numbers, and it was at the time. It was quite right. It was a tough course because at the time IRA was still prevalent, and the terrorism that was coming at the moment was just in its infancy, and that's what we dealt with. It was high level crime, terrorism. And, when you do the basic levels of surveillance, you can afford to make a mistake. You can afford to, oh, you've been taken out. And I did in the early days, and you learn how to not be too eager. Sometimes you just had to let the person commit somewhere before following them and stuff like that, or have confidence in your team members. And that was a big sort of step up, actually. There was only 5 armed surveillance teams in the Met at the time. Each team had about 11 operatives and a skipper on it. So you're talking about only 55 people in the Met. And I'll tell you that when I went on that team, that was an eye-opener. The ability of the people to do surveillance. I mean, I went on the team that some of the officers did the Dome Diamond Heist, which has been on there. Yeah. And I play golf. I won't say his name, but the person I play golf with, he was one of the people that went into the Dome and identified them when they were doing recce's. And wow. Yeah, it was unbelievable surveillance officers at the time, unbelievable. And yeah, we were doing all the arm jobs, and I eventually did training. I got Glock only, armed covert, carrying firearm, and that was the strangest day, I think, of my career, when I walked out onto the streets of London in plain clothes, carrying a gun in my pocket. You can do all the training, but nothing prepares you to go, I've got a gun in my pocket and I'm walking through the streets of London. And I can remember the reason why I did it. We were following a youngster. I think he was about 14 at the time, in Streatham, and it was late at night, and I'd gone into an estate and followed him through an estate. And we all knew that he had a Mac 10 on him, the old machine guns. And when you're following in surveillance, you have to be aware of what's going on around you. You can't just look at the person you're dealing with. You've got to be aware of your surroundings, because you don't know who's watching you. You don't know whether they're saying, you come through, I'm going to go through here and see who's following me. And I felt really exposed.
Yeah, I bet.
Thinking, if he pulls that gun, I've got nothing. I can call my colleagues knowing they've got guns, but by the time they've got to me, and that was what led me to go, do you know what? I'm going to do the gun course for protection, really. It was for protection. Yeah. That's why you did it as a surveillance officer, knowing that you've got protection for you. And that was, interesting, very interesting. It was the time of Harry Stanley as well. The guy that was shot with a table leg in Hackney. Do you know that one?
Yeah.
And that was quite a big thing. So carrying a gun was a real, big responsibility, and it still is a big responsibility today. And anyone that carries a gun in this job, they're doing it voluntarily.
Yeah.
And they don't have to do it, and they're not getting paid any extra money for it. And I think it's harder and harder now for someone to actually justify the reasons why they would carry it for their families.
I absolutely agree, mate. My hat goes off to them, because I just think that they're treated so badly when there's a fatal interaction. They get treated so badly for doing their job. The hindsight police are all over it. It's just absolute. But it must be, doing it overtly is one thing. If you're carrying something overtly, but when you're doing it covertly and all you've got is a baseball cap, which you throw on and hope for the best, you've got your body armor underneath your jacket, you look like the Michelin Man, and you pull out this gun, you think, you're taking your life in your hands, literally.
Well, the thing was then, we body armor in itself, I mean, the TSG, we weren't routinely wearing body armor at the time. Oh. And the body armor at the time on the TSG was chainmail, basically, heavy chainmail that wasn't gender specific. It was just a big lump of metal that you put over yourself, not made for women or men, just over there, and it didn't fit. I mean, we could talk about that later, with the things that happened to me on the TSG, which I think you know about. But so body armor hadn't been developed really. So when we were going on surveillance operations, they did bring in some body armor in, but it was a risk assessment whether you wore it, because it was so bulky that if you go down the street, you're putting yourself at more risk by wearing it, because obviously it looks obvious. You try putting body armor under a jacket, or in the summer under a t-shirt, it's just impossible, because you're going to get taken out. And we used to do a variety of jobs, pre-planned operations on armed robberies and things like that. And then we did sort of what's called lifestyles. And lifestyles, you were just the surveillance team. And if there was no element of firearms, or there was a hint, they might carry a gun, we just say, right, we've got them for our protection, so it's authorised the firearms, but we've not got any backup, because most of the time in the level I was doing, you had covert, proper firearms operatives that would do the interventions.
Yeah.
And and I can remember. I mean, the only time only once I've ever had my hand on my gun that I was in the decision making process of pulling it, and we were down in South London, and we were doing a lifestyle job. It was a Monday morning. Oh, right, we're gonna follow this group of people because we think they might be doing something. Just find out what they're doing. Came straight out of their house in the morning, 9:30. Went to the high street. I won't say where it is. I was out on foot with my friend doing this foot surveillance, and literally in front of me, he pulled a gun, put it to the head of a cash in transit, post office cash in transit guy, and basically demanded the cash box. And I was probably 30 feet away at that point. And no matter what training you've done in firearms, when you see somebody in the public arena have a gun put to their head, and you know you have a gun, and you've got to make a decision when to intervene at that point to save that person's life. But then you have to be conscious of what's going on around you as well, because if you pull a gun, then things could develop that are worse. Yeah, I can feel my hands going sweaty now thinking about it. Your hands go sweaty, your heart starts beating, and this is the thing people don't appreciate. You're making these decisions in split-second moments, and you're making them in effect. Nobody, I'm telling you now, I worked 30 years in the Met. Nobody goes to work in the morning to shoot or injure a member of the public. No one. No. Every cop that I've ever worked with goes into London, and it's still the same today, to help the public and stop bad people.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to do that. And the decision-making process is so instantaneous. You have split seconds to make these decisions, and you're doing it, for the reasons that only you can justify. But then what happens later on is what that decision-making process becomes under big scrutiny. Could you have done this? Could you have done that? And I would love someone to be in that position who's overseeing these things. You try doing that. You try being in that position where someone's pulling a gun on someone, or someone's life's at risk, and you have to make those split-second decisions. And I don't mind admitting, on that occasion, it happened so quickly, and he grabbed the cash box and they were gone. And then we followed them off to a house, and we actually managed to plot the house up. And then the firearms team came around and intervened. And when they came out, they're gone. But then you start reflecting on your decisions, and you do. And I went, well, actually, I could have justified shooting the guy at the time. Should I have done it? And it was so quick that I still maintain the right decision today. But had something else happen to that other member of the public, then, if they got injured, should I have made a different decision? And you can weigh it all up, and it's down to the individual. So it's a very difficult.
What I'd like to do is I'd like to get the defence barristers that make so much money out of this sort of situation or the prosecution barristers, actually, not defence, the prosecution barristers who prosecute police officers for undertaking a fatal shooting. And I'd like to put them on a firearms course and see what their stress levels, because they've never seen an angry person. Somebody kicking off because they've got 12 years in prison when they're surrounded by a load of prison guards is completely different to seeing somebody who's armed with a gun or a knife. And I would love them to come out with us, with you, with the firearms instructor, and say, there you go, there's a Glock, there's a training situation. Show me what you're made of. But they wouldn't do it.
The thing as well is that obviously the jobs I've been on, and I won't say which ones, the fatal shootings in the surveillance world, where people have been intercepted after we followed them with firearms and unfortunately been killed.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of intelligence goes on behind those operations, and that's not always given to the public, basically, should we say, the information those people have. So what that officer is doing as well at that time is taking on board all the information they've been told from the intelligence, in addition to that split-second incident. And look, at the end of the day, as a police officer, no matter what you do, it could taser someone, they could die or whatever. You've got to be judged on your, and you have to justify it yourself. And it's down to the individual. But I do think, coming away from firearms in general, I think police aren't getting the support that they need. And I think the Met Police who I have will always be in my heart. The Met, I love the Met. I think they are always the organisation that gets a lot of the flack. And but I always say, you know, when someone's breaking in your house at 3 o'clock in the morning, who are you calling?
Yeah.
And if you continually knock that organisation, then there's going to be no one to come and answer at 3 o'clock in the morning when someone is knocking your house down or breaking into your house or stealing your mobile phone. There's going to be no one, because no one's going to want to do it.
No, of course they're not.
No one's going to want to do it.
One of the other problems is that the public say, well, there's no point in reporting to the police, but there's every point in reporting stuff to the police, because even if the police don't do anything about it, they know it's registered, it's logged.
Yeah.
If you get a series of events and you don't know about it, you can't deal with it. And that, from a policing perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing some leadership training with the Met, with the skippers and governors, and also some of the civilian staff. And we get the analysts come on these courses quite a bit, and they tell us, obviously, you know, if so and so is given information on this place, they can link that all together.
Yeah.
And actually say, we've now arrested that person, but we've now linked them into 20 different crimes. And actually, that part of policing is a lot easier today because of technology.
Absolutely.
And CCTV, and so, which wasn't so easy in the 80s and 90s. You know, it wasn't done like that. And that's the thing, you can link these people in together. And, you know, and that's why I say to, I mean, I do think when community policing came in and went out, that's when you realise they were the eyes and ears of the police. You know, community policing, you know, you've got someone you can go and speak to. Oh, by the way, I've seen this going on in next door, or whatever. There's a smell of drugs or whatever. No one knows where to go now to tell people that stuff. And so people don't bother. And that's what I think. And it is important, because you just don't know who's looking at who, basically. And I know that better than anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. But every crime starts in the community.
Yeah.
Every crime, you know, whether it be a fraud or whatever it may be, it is a community issue to start off with.
Yeah.
But let's go back to, you know, your time on TSG. You had you were involved in an incident there which is quite catastrophic, wasn't it? Yeah. Well, look, I always mention her name, Nina Mackay. She was a good friend of mine, and I've been an advocate of keeping her memory alive for many, many years. I still speak to her dad on a regular basis. And, you know, if I go back to what happened, she was fatally stabbed when we went into her premises in East London on the 24th of October 1997. And, you know, I've been only recently I've spoken about it through this leadership training where we talk about trauma. And it's more about the trauma, how it was dealt with in 1997 with police officers, to the way that trauma is dealt with today and mental health is dealt with today. And in all honesty, it wasn't really dealt with. Nobody helped us. We had no help, you know. I mean, I would talk about the incident, but I don't like talking about what happened in the property. But long and short of it, the floor is yours. You say what you want, what you don't want.
The end result is we got called. We were what was called area raid. So you had commissioners reserve, and then we were area reserve. So you're just patrolling wherever you patrol. And the lead up to it, we were out on the car. I think it was 5 of us on the carrier, Nina being one of them. And we went, I can remember being in Ilford Nick. I always remember being in Ilford Nick and her being on the phone before we went there. And then we got this call. And long and short of it, it was a mentally deranged gentleman who had mental health issues. Magdi El Ghazouli was his name. He'd been caught, I think it was like 10 days before, outside Stoke Newington police station, trying to assault a police officer and been armed with a load of knives. And he'd not turned up for bail. And they basically said, can you guys go round and arrest him? And we went, yeah, no problem. And some of the things during that week was just a set of circumstances. We had a brand new sergeant start on the Monday. I won't mention his name because he still struggles today. He's another top guy, but he started on the TSG on the Monday. And our previous skipper, a guy called Dave Shipp, top skipper again, he'd finished and gone off. I think he went to Bethnal Green, but then we had a brand new skipper on the Monday. This was the Friday. And we went to this call, and I can remember going to the front door, and I always remember listening to the front door, and it's bizarre the things you remember. He was playing the guitar really badly through the door. I could hear that. And we had a chat, And we said, like, what we're going to do is we're going to call some more of the TSG to come and help us. And I can look at that incident and think of incidents before that where we would have turned up with the five of us and probably go, let's put the door in, let's go and get this guy.
Yeah.
And the one thing I've learned is you just don't know. Well, any day you go to work as a police officer, you don't know what's going to happen. Any door that you go through, you don't know what's going to happen. Right. And what I learned is whatever you're going into, make sure you are planning it correctly, which is what we did. And I think a lot of it is because the new skipper joined, and we said, right, what we're going to do, I went to the flat underneath, I got a floor plan, went back up. We had, in total, probably 14, 15 of us all lined up, ready to go in the property. Everything had been planned meticulously. Nina had just done her enforcer course, and she basically said, I want to do the door. And ultimately, I mean, I remember reading the paper after it happened and things like, what was a female? This is how the world has changed. What was a female doing at the door, putting that door in? Well, I'll tell you why a female was at the door putting the door in, because she could do the job.
Yeah.
Right? Hang on a minute.
No, I'm with you, mate. I'm with you.
And she could do the job. She was a brilliant cop, great person. And listen, she was as good as any of us. It's as simple as that. And that's why she was at the front door. And if you had that today, equality is obviously quite bigger today than it was at the time.
Yep. But
she was as equal as us. She could do the job. She knew what she was doing, and she put the door in. It was her first door that she put in. And look, I know in the papers there was a lot of talk about body armour. And the only I'm going to say about the body armour is it was really heavy. I told you what it was like. It was chainmail. You could hardly stand up in it. It wasn't gender specifics. It was not built for females, males. It was built for a human being. And long and short, but we'd all had a long chat, and she's like, just can't hit the door with the body armour on. And there was a discussion about that, and it was her decision.
Yeah.
So we planned it meticulously. Everybody knew their roles, and it was just a set of circumstances. When the door went in, the guy was behind the door. It went in first time. There was a lot of things unexpected happened as that went open, and you can't plan for the unexpected. But she was stabbed, only a single stab wound, and we basically got her onto the carrier. We didn't wait for an ambulance. We got on the carrier, got her to Newham General Hospital, and I, we thought that's fine. They talk about the golden hour, Paul, don't they? The golden hour. You're okay. You're getting me going, man. But I was a 26, 27-year-old, and we got her to hospital, and I thought that was it, because she's going to be okay. They knew we were coming, and I only found out not long ago that it didn't matter what medical attention she had, that stab wound was going to kill her, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And but. So we took her to the hospital. We went back to Forest Gate Police Station. We thought it was going to be fine, because you think it's going to be fine. And I couldn't even tell you his name. I couldn't even tell you. I think he was the superintendent. He came into the room, and we were sitting there. All the unit was sitting there that dealt with it. And he just said, "Unfortunately, I've got to tell you that Nina's passed away." And I was in shock. I was like, what? I can remember saying to him, you got to be mistaken. She was all right. She was fine. And then I can remember the next 2 weeks, but it was a blur. The next couple of weeks, it was a blur. I felt personally like we'd let her down, because long and short of it, I was on the shield directly behind her. So we were, me and my partner. She was part of our crew. She was my bus, right? 5 of us on that night.
Yeah.
And we were the ones right behind her. And then the people that joined were the ones behind us. And we were the shields. Me and my partner. I said Kev. Look, his name was Kev. We were the 2 shields waiting to go in behind her. I actually was the person that arrested him, and he was taken to Edmonton. But I didn't go with him to Edmonton. But I felt like I'd let her down. That's how I felt. I felt like I'd let her dad down. Her dad's Sid was a ex-chief superintendent, Mr. Mackay. And how he's described to me, he's just a lovely man, Sid.
Yeah.
And he's the sort of leader that Met would probably need today. He retired in, I think, 94. He retired, something like that, 95. And how he was described as me, And this was by Nina. He's like Mr. Mackay from the Porridge. Remember the Porridge?
Yeah.
He's Mr. Mackay, and I could see that. He's Scottish guy, very proud, very. I can imagine what sort of leader he was in the Met. And the bit that I look at is the trauma. What I speak to officers about now is the trauma of that incident. And you know, if I tell you, we did the hospital bit. And and then me and my partner Kev, we were the two that sort of did a basic statement on the night, because they said just give us something, and we did a basic statement. And I remember driving back into Bow, and her car was there, and it was the only car apart from my car that was there. And you just look at it was a little red Suzuki thing, and and I drove home on my own. I lived on my own in where I said I come from, South Woodham in Essex, and I don't think that had happened today. A 26, 27-year-old driving home, having just been involved in a killing of their colleague. And then, if I'm honest, and it wasn't anyone's fault, they just didn't know what to do with us. There was no support. There was no counselling or, you know, trauma support or mental health. It wasn't a thing, Paul. We were the TSG, you know. It was.
Yeah, no. Look at
stiff upper lip, if I'm honest. Huh?
Two blokes sitting there crying, and you know, but we But
another time,
you
know, so what we basically did, they didn't know what to do. So we spent her funeral was on the 5th of November, and we spent a couple of weeks basically just going to Chigwell, which was the police club in East London, and we all sat together, and if I'm honest, we all cried a bit, and we all hugged each other a bit, and we all sort of just didn't know what to deal with it. And then, you know, there was her dad, quite rightly, he said, I want to know what happened. And I can remember going to his house with my partner Kev, and he said, look, I've read the papers. I don't want to know I want to know what happened. I want to know from you.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting in his house going through. I mean, his son Nick was a police officer and inspector in the Met, retired. So they're a policing family, and that was the hardest thing that I've ever done. And, you know, I'm not saying what I'm saying is I don't know whether that would have happened today. I'm not saying it wouldn't have happened, but the support around the officer going and doing that, I would think would be more, because I was just, look, you're 20, he needs to go and tell him.
Yeah. And
you don't know what to say. You know, I just felt like I let him down. That was the biggest thing I had. I'd let him down, I'd let her down.
But you hadn't, because like you quite rightly say, policing was evolving. You know, when I joined, the girls had stocking allowance, and you know they had the small sticks and that. And if they had the courage to step up and do what she did on that particular day, then do you know what? We're all equal.
Yeah,
and that could have easily been you going through that door. It could have been easily you, and I could be interviewing her today talking about what happened to you.
Well, the wider impact of the trauma you don't realise, and I realise today, is like the CAD operator. I can remember they really struggled. The CAD operator, CAD, whoever, people don't know, that's the dispatcher effectively, and they felt guilty because they were the people that dispatched us to the call. And, you know, you hear people that were around on the crime scene at the time suffering because they were on the crime scene, and you don't really hear well. And ultimately what happened was we had that period to her funeral on the 5th of November, and I carried her coffin with Kev and a brother and a guy. She was at Charing Cross before that. And then it was literally like when the funeral had finished, the book shut and nobody mentioned her name.
Mm.
And that's the thing that I think a lot of guys, and now I think people would talk about it. Nobody would talk about how they felt. And I can remember being it happened in October, November. I left the TSG in the January to go into the surveillance world, what I discussed earlier. And I can remember sitting on a carrier and literally no one saying a word to each other. We just sat there driving about. And I can remember feeling anxiety about stopping people, you know, because that was our job, to go and stop people about. And then I can remember, and don't ask me the month, but I know it was between that period of November and January. We went to another call where I was on the back door. I've never been at the back door of this property when we were going to go into a premises with the shield and in all the kit. And I can remember nearly having a panic attack. Thinking, oh my God, because you start thinking about what had happened before.
Yeah.
And, it was, the thing I learned from it, Paul, is the sergeant blamed himself, the new skipper, and it wasn't his fault. It was just a set of circumstances, and no one's ever got over it.
No.
He particularly struggled because he was the sergeant in charge, and I didn't appreciate that until I became a sergeant. And you are responsible. We said, and the thing was, I think anyone who was there that night, the one thing we can say is we planned that meticulously, and we did everything right, and just something happened. Now, if I hadn't planned it meticulously and I'd been cut corners somewhere, then I probably couldn't have lived with myself. And that's the thing I learned from policing, is that you don't know what you're going into. You don't know what door you're going through. You don't know when you get up in the morning where you're going to. And something I try to instill into, obviously, the work for me is treat every door like something could happen. It's not something I spoke about from, well, if I say to you, from when it happened, Sid, I was 48 at the time, so when would that be? I got asked by Sid.
Oh, you're not.
So Dad,
I'm only joking.
So I'm 54. So that would have been 2018. This happened 20 years. Never spoke about it. I went through the job. It's not something you bring up.
No.
And then I did. He asked me to do an interview on LBC with Nick Ferrari, and it was to do with the police arboretum.
Yeah.
And it was support of the arboretum. And I did this interview with LBC, and the amount of people said, I didn't know you were involved in that. I didn't know. And that's the thing. You carry it with you, but it's not something you can talk to me about. But Mrs. Me with trauma, this is what I say. I say, you don't know when trauma's going to hit you. It affected me when I had kids, because then I started to appreciate Sid's perspective on it. Now I've got my own children. It hit me more then, and that was 2004 when I had kids. So it was a while later. It affects you at different times, and you deal with it. It changes you. It changed me. That day changed me forever.
Yeah.
But I think, this is what I think, there should be a register of anyone that's been involved in big, large-scale trauma. And it's not about asking me next week or in 3 weeks' time or in a month's time, how are you feeling? And that's the worst thing you can say to someone, by the way.
Yeah.
How are you feeling? Because the answer that you'll get from somebody who say, how do you feel? They go, yeah, I'm fine. What you should be saying is, right, what you've just been through is traumatic. We need to talk about it. We need to go through it. We need to see where you are. We need to, because if you ask any tears, I don't want to talk to anyone. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. So it goes unspoken. I think today we have got better at that. And like I repeat, the worst thing you can say to somebody is, are you all right? And they'll go, yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah.
But when they're not really all right. And that's why police officers today dealing with trauma are committing suicide on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And my thing is, there should be a register somewhere, for example, if I look at myself, to say, right, 5 years' time, we're going to check in. 10 years' time, we're going to check in.
Yeah.
15 years' time, we're going to. I know it sounds, but it's a hard thing to deal with, or to also want to coordinate, but there should be something.
But there's no reason why it can't be coordinated, because they'll coordinate a project around airwaves.
Yeah.
This is something, and you're absolutely right. This is something that is achievable, because when you look at it, everybody's going to go through trauma to different degrees throughout your police service. You cannot go through your police service unless you've spent your whole life in an office somewhere where you've never met anyone. And as you quite rightly say, your call handlers wouldn't have even known the individuals involved. But when they get that call to say, can we have a medic here, please? And then they get that news that someone's passed away, it has a massive impact. And to keep that as a register, that can't be that difficult, surely, not with the technology we've got available to us.
Well, I do know today that police are a lot better, quite rightly, at dealing with trauma. But, I don't know who would coordinate that. But I've heard stories and, people dealing with incidents that sometimes it's been good, sometimes it's not been so good. And I think line managers, I mean, if you look at my incident, the PCs were involved, the sergeant was involved.
Yeah.
You know, so you've got two ranks involved in trauma there, and then you've got probably inspectors and chiefs not really knowing, not having any training about it. I mean, for me, when I had staff working for me as an inspector, you know, I took that experience into that supervisory role where I knew, like, let's be careful here, let's do this here. So maybe at times I didn't know why I was doing it because I never told them about it.
Oh.
But, you know, it made me more risk averse to things. You know, I mean, I know Sid himself was an advocate throughout the years of saying, why are we, I don't even think they do it anyway. We used to call what's called violent man training in the TSG, public order, where it would be you going into a flat and how you dealt with a violent person in a flat. And we were saying, well, why are we going into those situations where we can throw tear gas in or we can chuck a dog in there? You know, you can get a police dog to go in. Why are we doing that? I couldn't tell you today what is going on in that sort of arena, whether that's done there. But, you know, it's just it's a terrible, terrible thing that happened. It can happen to any police officer when they're going to work. And I never thought it'd happen to me. And Sid, I have been an advocate for years of keeping her name alive. I've been to, you know, so many events. Jonathan Osborne, who is the Met chaplain, he's a friend. And for me, it's about keeping her memory alive.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing. And you know, if we talk about equality in this day and age, she was a shining star in that. Let me tell you.
Yeah, absolutely. The fact is that her memory will never go because you've got the brilliant police memorials, you've got all the other stuff that goes on, and the way that you and I doing this will keep another part of her going. Do you know what I mean? It just makes that massive difference.
Well, we do have every year, and we've been doing it every year, I think. We have a meeting at Chigwell. We do this. They have a memorial day, and a lot of the people from the time turn up. We run. Their dad comes, and that's another way we keep a memory alive. There's been I've given some information into a book that got written about deaths of police officers, and there's, you know, the Arboretum, and you know that's the important part for me, that nobody forgets the sacrifices that Nina made and other people make in protecting the public, because that's what it's about, protecting the public.
And do you know what, mate? There will be other Ninas, because that's the way that the job is. The risk that's around it, the levels of violence that are offered against police officers is unprecedented at the moment, and there's not enough deterrence in order to support the cops. And you know that's a shame on the people, that the magistrates and the judges that don't lock people up for it. But anyway, that's another story. If Nina's dad ever wants to have a chat, I would absolutely love to do this with him. So if you could ask him, I'd be very, very grateful.
Well, look, I will tell him, obviously we're doing this, and he can listen to it, and then, you know, and he's an advocate for keeping her memory alive. You know, he did a recent piece with that was memoriam of police women who've died in the line of duty, which I know was very emotional for him.
Yeah.
And listen, it's difficult. I mean, his heart's been broken, and I try to. My job is to make sure she's not forgotten. That's my job. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks for that, mate, because you really got me going. But anyway, so you've done the surveillance. You're on the surveillance. At what point do you get promoted from there?
So what had happened? I'd had my first child in 2004, and then I had my second child in 2006, and then I had 18 years in the job at that point. I'd been 10 years in dedicated surveillance from 98 to 2007-ish. And I'd done 2002 to 2006, 7-ish on the highest level of surveillance. And what it basically boiled down to, Paul, was, am I going to do this for the next 13 years till I retire? Or which would risk me not seeing my children growing up? That was the important thing for me. I had children because I want to see them grow up. And the surveillance world is not a world that you can get. It's not like, hi there, I'm going to be home at 9. I mean, my wife today was my girlfriend at the time, and she would say, you're going to be home? I go, yeah. And then I'd be on the way home, and another job will come in.
Yeah.
So I'd always made the decision that if I was going to leave surveillance, it was going to be on promotion. I wasn't going to go back to division as a PC. I was going to go on promotion. So that was really the driver for me. It's the kids. I wanted to see the kids go up, and I went, right, I'm going to now go on the promotion sort of pathway. And I felt at that point I was experienced enough to be able to make a difference as a leader. And I took the exam, passing it in 2007. And then in 2008, that March, I was promoted to skipper and I went to Paddington, which was an eye-opener, having spent 10 years in covert surveillance.
Yeah, okay.
And suddenly you're thrust back into the uniform world of frontline policing, basically. Yeah, that was an eye-opener. The difference in way things are done. And, you know, it doesn't, people will say, you know, I've been in the specialist all this time, I can't, going back, so, you know, but it's not, it's still the same. If you're a good cop, you're a good cop. You can go back, you know, you've got to learn new paperwork that has to be written or new computer systems that have come in. But ultimately, fundamentally, it's about being a good cop and a good communicator. And for me, being a good cop is being a good communicator. That is it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So what roles did you undertake there? Were you on shift or were you custody?
Do you know what? I was back there. You did all the roles, custody, because now custody is like a specialist role. But then if you were a skipper on team, you were doing, you know, you were I can't remember the name of the role now. It's like you're the ops skipper. You know, you dealt with all the who's going to do what where. You did custody. You did sort of every sort of role that a skipper does or did. And now they've broken those roles down a bit and said, right, that's dedicated in custody now. So so I did all different roles there, but I'd already made my mind up that I wanted to carry on going up the ranks because I thought I was ready. And that's why as soon as I could, I had to do a year at the time because you were a probationary sergeant for a year and you couldn't apply for promotion until you'd done that. And then I applied to do the exam again because the stuff was still fresh in my memory. You know, I'd studied really hard for that. I'd studied really hard for that exam because I wanted to pass it. And I did pass it, and I passed it quite well. And then it was all still in my mind. So it was only sort of refreshing my memory. And then I went on to pass the governors. And then, so I only spent 2 years as a skipper from 2008 to 2010 at Paddington. Great Nick, though. Great governor, Mark Chaplin. And he was who I was playing golf with yesterday.
All right, okay.
Top governor, nice bloke, top fella, another good cop, and and then I did inspectors and I moved on again.
And where did you go to from there?
So from there I went to Ealing, I can remember at the time in the Met. This is you've got to love the Met for certain things. They said, right, okay. By that time they'd started to go to bigger boroughs. It wasn't divisional. You had I think it was 32 boroughs at the time. I think.
Yeah, it was.
And they said, oh, right, okay, you can apply for 6 boroughs. So I applied for these 6 boroughs. Bear in mind where I live now, living in Watford, and you start looking at travel. And, you know, when you have kids, you haven't got as much money as you used to have. So you try and use public transport as much as you can. So I'd looked at things like going back to Westminster, Harrow, Colindale, all the sort of ones around where I am. I'll never forget it. I got promoted and I got through. You've got XB, right, was the code. I was like, XB, where's that? And I had to get a map at XB. I was Ealing. They give me Ealing. And I thought, so I didn't get any of my choices, is what I'm getting at. I put 6 choices in. I didn't get any of them. But I go back to my mum in 1986 going, everything happens for a reason. And I went to Ealing, again, worked with some brilliant people. And people say, when do you think your favourite time in the job is? Bear in mind, some of the things I've done, TSG, surveillance, probably what we'll go on to later. I still love being a duty officer at Ealing. I was Acton. We had 2 duty officers on that borough. We had one at Southall, one at Acton. I was the Acton duty officer. Acton was the more crime end. The other end, Southall, was lots of, it was a high area of ethnic, what's the word I'm trying to find?
Yeah, a diverse.
More diverse area. You had things like honour-based violence, stuff like that. It was a totally separate sort of entity, and I absolutely loved my time at Acton. I had a brilliant team, and I went there, and I specifically said, look, I want to be a duty officer because you weren't guaranteed to be a duty officer, but then you could have been in an office role. I didn't want to do that. And my chief inspector, I'm Simon Message, lovely guy again, and he knew my background. I thought my background's been crime throughout my whole service, and he put me at Acton with a team that he told me it's the worst performing team on the borough. That's what he said. He said, you're going to sort it out. And actually, I went on to that team, and what I found was they were all great people. They'd had acting inspectors for about the last 2 years, so you never had any continuity, and that's a big thing in policing, continuity, right? If you're going to set standards, you've got to be there to see them out.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah?
And my thing about leadership is, if you look after your people, they will look after you. It's as simple as that. You look after people, they'll look after you. And look, I went there a couple of weeks, watched them, saw what they did. And one of my pet hates was uniforms. Well, not pet hate, but uniform standards is important to me. Okay. How you look. If you look professional, you're going to be professional.
Yeah. And
if we pick like Virgin Atlantic, okay, or British Airways, and you see an air stewardess or an air steward, and you see their unit, they all look smart, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
They look professional. Why can't we be like that?
I agree.
And there was an air at the time of people coming out of training, and 6 years later, they look not smart, is what I'm going to say. And so I had this thing about, which we joked about when I left the Nick, about when you come on parade, you're ready to go. Don't walk on my parade with your tie off, your epaulets not done up, your boots not done up. Because when I joined in '89, you came on parade, when the skipper walked in, you stood up, you put your helmet on, you stood there with your truncheon, your pocketbook, and you had tunic on.
Yeah.
And so over the time I was there, I brought in, first thing was uniform standards. Then it was basically saying, I'm not going to get you to do anything that I'm not prepared to do. So I used to go out with them. I'd go and patrol with them. Stop and search is a real thing I'm passionate about. And I know it gets knocked a lot, but it is the way that you're going to stop knives being on the streets of London, by police officers having the confidence to go and stop someone. Now, in my opinion, if you are on night duty and at 3 o'clock in the morning, there is somebody walking down a street, you've got every right to go and ask them what they're doing. Doesn't mean you've got to search them. You've got to say, hello, sir, what are you doing? And if they say, I'm just going to my house around the corner. Okay, what's the address? And they start going, well, I'm not too sure. Then the ground start becoming big. Well, why are you here? Give us your address then. And then you start doing inquiries. That leads you to your investigation, or why is this person here? And if you get enough, then you've got enough to stop and search someone. And it's having that confidence to say, well, hang on, what are you doing out late at night? Why are you here? What are you doing? And I'm an advocate of that. And I went out and I did a lot of stop and search as a governor, because that's my background in the TSG, and that led to the team they come along with you, and that led to us arresting more people and people feeling good because they were nicking bad people. Yeah. They were nicking people with knives, they were nicking people with drugs, they were nicking violent offenders. And then what ended up happening, and the old chief super, Andy, I won't say his surname. There's a reason I won't say his surname. I knew him from the days at Westminster. What a top chief superintendent he was. Or he would still be today, if I'm honest. His thing, Richie, he used to call me Richie. Crime's not difficult. When you've got a problem, you put the resources into it. It's as simple as that. Get people there, get people to deal with it. And, he was an advocate of that as well, that style of policing as well. And what my team ended up going was from the bottom performing to the top performing. Now, he used to say to me, in leadership, he goes, you don't want to be the best, but you don't want to be the worst, because they're the two people that are up. If you're the worst, they're looking at you, and if you're the best, you're the sort of, they're there to be knocked down. And we went from the poorest performing to the best performing. And something that I always did is I protected them from the politics of policing from above, the spreadsheets of this, the spreadsheets of that. And I said, you just go out. I said, you do these are the things that were important to me: smartness, getting to calls where people need us, and it's things like, I don't know, leadership today, I think you're challenged a lot about, people will say you're bullying people, it's not about bullying people, it's just about being robust in your leadership. For example, I can give you an example of my leadership. There was a call to Acton, and it was a suspects on premises, female had come home, and her front door was open. And my team knew that if that sort of call, if I had to call up and say someone taking that, and I had to do it twice, they knew there was going to be a problem. And ultimately, I walked, and this is how policing's changed. I come out my office when no one answered it. I walk into the PC's writing room, and there's a PC sitting there with his feet on the desk.
Oh.
And I says, have you just heard that call? Yeah. But I haven't got a car. That was his answer. And I said, you got 2 feet, and that call is 5 minutes away on foot. And I'd rather you're making your way there, because you might still be the first person there. But that was the first thing I did, is people, hang on a minute, I used to walk all the time. Yeah. But people, I need a car. You don't need a car. You've got 2 feet, get there. And you start instilling that in people. And then there were times where people needed me, and they always do. and I would back them to the hill. They knew that. My team knew that I'd back them to the hill, and I would take flak for them. I'd support them, and if they stepped out of line, they knew what they'd get. But then I'd forget about it. I'd be, and I learned that from all the different leaders that I'd led under. And do you know what? You never know whether you're doing leadership right. It's difficult. It's difficult. No one ever knows. You know, I would hate for anyone that I led to go and go, oh, because I sort of say to people, you're remembered when you retire. I say this on leadership training. You're remembered for one of two things. It'll be Richard Keil, what a top governor, or Richard Keil, what a not so good governor. Yeah, that's what you're remembered for. No one remembers all the jobs you did. You're remembered for that. And you know what? I think this is probably the proudest I've ever been in a job. This makes me emotional. There's a girl, and Rebecca Barrett, lovely girl. She was on my team in that period, and she met her husband. I'm not going to say her now, husband Michael, on the team. And I'd left by then. I'd gone on to driver training, so I went from Ealing to driving school for 6 years. And in that period, they got together when they were on my team, and she got pregnant. And she'd had some issues health-wise through her pregnancy, which was a lot of it was put down to the pregnancy. And the child was born, and then I think it was about 2-3 weeks later, she fell ill, got into hospital, and she found she got stage 4 breast cancer, and she died in hospital 10 days later.
Oh.
And they married in hospital, and it's another absolutely devastating thing. And I got a phone call from. Let me start.
You cheered me right up today, mate.
Nah, but you know what? This is how you go. Do you know what? I couldn't have been doing much wrong, because I got a phone call from Michael, her husband, still in the police today, and he said, "I'd like you to come and talk at her funeral and basically do a speech." And I worked out, I think there'd been 10 inspectors between me and that time.
Wow.
And he'd asked me to come back and speak on behalf of the team and her at the funeral. Okay. And I again, that's one of the hardest things I've ever done.
Oh.
But like the young lad now, he's about, oh God, I'm going to say, I see on his Facebook, you know, he's growing up now. He's 5, 6, 7 years of age. But this is the thing, and the thing that I can't comment on the job today because I'm not in it. But the one thing when I went through trauma you always felt like you were part of something.
A family.
This is it. You were part of a family. People, you know, people to put their arm around you, and you know, you felt protected a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, I know that I say about the support with the trauma, sort of the counselling side of it, but there was always someone there. You know, it was just like you said, it's a family. It really is a family. Whether it is today, I don't know, because I can't comment because I've left nearly 6 years ago now. But you know, that's when I just said to myself, I couldn't have been doing my, you know, no one's a perfect. I'm not saying I'm the perfect leader, but what I'm saying is I cared about the people. That was all I cared about, because that's all you'll remember for. And if you care about your people, they will care about you, and you won't go far wrong.
But the thing is about being in any family, you're not all going to get on.
No.
There's going to be times where you can't stand one another. I'll tell you the difference between the police family and our families, true life families. When the shout goes up in the police, even if you don't like somebody, you go.
Yeah.
You know, when they're in that moment of need and they're getting the life kicked out of them in a pub, irrespective of how you feel about that person, you tip out. And I'm not saying you wouldn't for your own personal family, but it's. I don't think it's as tight knit. I don't think our life family, because if you look at it, we live with our partners, our children, and our parents, and beyond that, they're relations, but we don't have that same linkage. Whereas when you're in the police family, everybody gets involved.
Well, you know, you go out on patrol in a car with someone, and that person could save your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's simple as that. That person could be responsible for keeping you alive.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and you never know when that moment's going to happen. And that's the thing about police. You never know when that moment's going to happen. It doesn't happen very often.
No.
And as you said, I I see more and more now police officers getting assaulted.
Oh.
And you know, and I think, you know, I try to, when I talk about the police, I try to talk in facts. Look, it's never going to be the perfect. Nothing's ever been perfect in the police. It's always going to have its issues. Like any organisation can have its issues. But what worries me is this trend at the moment of police officers being subject to being assaulted and people not being robust about how that's dealt with, which is leading to people walking into shops and stealing things carte blanche and walking out. And I just think we've got to sort of press the reset button and start looking at zero tolerance on certain things. And actually, people say the little things don't matter. They do matter, because if you don't deal with the small stuff, the big stuff starts getting big. If you take care of the small stuff, the big stuff takes care of itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the project in New York in the early 80s, the Broken Windows Project. And they dealt with the windows, they fixed those and moved on and so on and so forth. We will get back to that stage. We're going to have to. But it's a real difficult sort of conversation, because it costs money and time and people. Have you got any regrets about your police service? I mean, you went on and did your driver training.
I left, and this again was, you know, it's the first time that I was in what I call non-frontline role. That's what I'd say, and you know what, I felt like I'd earned it. Actually, I felt like I'd earned it to have because I was at Hendon, which is 15 minutes from my house, and it allowed me to do things in the evening with my kids and stuff like that, but still be involved in policing. And yeah, I really enjoyed that time in driving school, and it led to, well, I then went on to be a chief inspector in roads policing. But ultimately, what I learned in the driving school, I got some teaching qualifications. It sort of led to me getting employment in the outside world, basically.
Yeah,
that's what it did.
But do you have any regrets about your policing career?
No, do you know, I have no regret. I mean, there was a thing in me when I retired. I was a chief inspector when I retired. And I would have loved to have been a chief superintendent in charge of a borough. That's what I would have loved. And my old chief super, Andy, I won't mention his first name, he said to me once, he said, two best ranks in the job are inspector and chief super. Because as an inspector, you're the head of the operational world. You're running the skippers and the PCs. And as a chief super, you're head of the senior leadership world. You know, you're in charge of the superintendent, the chief inspector. Because the chief inspector's role is pretty much a PC role with the senior leadership team.
Yeah.
You're doing all the donkey work, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, I it's not a regret. It's not a regret, because if I'd have done promotion earlier, I wouldn't have done all the things that I did as a PC, the surveillance stuff and the PC stuff. It was a matter of, do I stay on past my 30 and pursue that? And I went, no, I've done my bit. Sid said it to me. He said, you've done your bit. Let someone else have a go.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
I absolutely agree. Now, you're going to say there's some stuff that you did on the surveillance team. Is there anything, you know, you want to throw into the mix around that, the stuff that you did there?
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, there must have been some, I mean, you've spoken about some of the sexy stuff anyway, but, you know, the interesting, light-hearted moments that you took part in on surveillance.
Yeah, but there's some things you can talk about and there's some things you can't, Paul. You know that. Even today you can't talk about. Listen, the surveillance world was a group of brilliant people that we didn't only do surveillance in London, we travelled the country and we stayed in places. We had good laughs. We had some heavy nights, and it was a lot of good people, you know. Look, do you know what this is? For me, we've become a reactive police force, in my opinion. This is all my opinion. We react when something happens.
Yeah.
In my service and into my surveillance career, we were proactive. We proactively stopped crime.
Yeah.
But now we react, and I think that is where we've got to start thinking about being more proactive. And you know when I describe the surveillance pathway in my day, TSG onto area surveillance onto the top level surveillance. Nowadays, it's pretty much just the top level surveillance. You don't have those lower tiers. And I think that's something to think about, because I'm going to be honest with you, when I was doing area surveillance, which was one area, which was central, and we worked with things like the hotel squad, drug squad, the crime squad on one area. Now, up until I worked there, you don't realise things like hotels, the amount of crime that goes on in hotels. But yeah, as in, people are checking out in the morning, they've got all their cases everywhere. You'll have someone in there, I'm going to nick that.
Yeah.
We followed the guy in that era. who basically very well dressed. He looked a bit like David Dickinson.
Oh, yeah.
He was very like that, dapper. And he'd basically walk into posh hotels. He'd walk around all the floors. And on each of these floors, like you go to Savoy, they've got like vases and things on these floors, as like show stuff. He'd just nick them. And no one would challenge him because he looked the part. And that's half the battle. If you look the part.
Yeah. Well,
we did a lot of that sort of stuff, a lot of that low level stuff. And what it was, we were accessible to boroughs. So if you look at a frontline cop, who's doing frontline policing at Ealing, for example, where I was, and they got a problem with cycle theft, that area surveillance team, they were accessible. You could say, look, we've got this real problem. Oh, we'll come down, we'll spend a week with you, and we'll sort it out. But now you've got to go through tasking to get surveillance. It's quite a big thing, and it's only used to the high level stuff. Look, I know it's an expensive asset. It's a very expensive asset, surveillance. But, for me, you've got to get back to dealing with the small stuff. That's it. You've got to deal with the small stuff, and you've got to sort that out. And with the police itself, I think, look, it's a money thing, and I don't want to get into politics. But there was something said a few years ago that things are going to happen in the police, and a politician said, you're scaremongering, right? And actually, if you look back to that and you look at what's happened now, all of those things that said were going to happen are happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
And me, I ask people on leadership training, if you got asked, because most people who join the police, if my son wanted to join the police, or your son or someone's son, you'd say, go and speak to Paul Maleary, he was ex-LB. Go and speak to Richard Keil, ask him what they think.
Yeah.
And what I don't like at the moment is I ask that to people in the job, in different constabularies and the Met. And I said, would you recommend it? And they went, no. And I said, just think about your resourcing then. You can't moan about resources if you're going around not recommending this job. I said, if people ask me that question, I will say, I absolutely love my 30 years in the job. It's changed, as everything should change.
Yep.
But go and find out for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go and see what it's all about, because it's an unbelievable organisation where you do some amazing things.
And the job that we joined, my dad joined the job in '68. The job he joined wasn't the job that the person had joined in 1938.
No.
And it evolves, and communications and types of crime and all those sorts of things, and that's what it is. And as we said at the very beginning, the biggest problem is that it's under-resourced.
I think with that, I've got some opinions about that, and I try to deal with facts. I've always dealt with facts with policing. What I know is, if I look at the Met, I think they're struggling to recruit, and more importantly, they're struggling to retain. And we were both on LinkedIn. How frequent now do you see a 20-year cop decided to move on? It's happening a lot.
But all the time. I see it every single day. I'll get an email saying I'm looking for work.
I'm looking, and you've got people leaving the job that wouldn't have left the job before. I think the pension changes did that, because, I joined the job at 19, retired at 49, which, as I explained to my kids, that is not the norm. But anyone who says about the police pension, we paid a lot of money into that over the years, a lot of money.
Absolutely.
And I think people get to 50 and think, I can't imagine doing this job at 60, because it's hard. It's hard on your body.
Yeah,
I've been slashed here. I've got a scar on my face here. I've snapped an Achilles, changed someone. I've got a shoulder injury, all of which now start to affect me in older age.
Yeah.
So you're going to go through the mill if you're a police officer. And I think the retention thing is the biggest issue. You've got people joining, but they're leaving with it. Not only the 20-year people, they're leaving after 2 years going, I'm not quite sure about this. So for me, if you can get the recruitment and the training of the initial officer right, which, look, at the moment, they've got things like the degree apprenticeship route. I can understand why they did it, because they wanted to professionalise the policing qualification, but that's had its problems, because people struggle to get to the academic level, or, they get a degree and think, thank you very much. But I think we've got to look at, I described a police when I joined, people coming from Scotland and places like that. That isn't happening today. And I would be saying we had things called section houses. Which you could come to London, join the London police, but we had these accommodation blocks that you could stay in.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at my best friend, the job Ian, still my best friend today, would he come in today's world down from that little town in Scotland and join the Met? Because he'd be saying, I can't afford to move down there.
No, exactly.
The rent's ridiculous. So I do think the police has got to look at, maybe we'll go back a little bit and we'll start creating some accommodation blocks where people can live and they haven't got to pay much rent, and then you might get people wanting to join it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, the other thing for me is the centralised training schools. You need to have these big training schools because that's where you find the good, the bad and the ugly. And you learn your craft. But Richard, I've really enjoyed our very emotional chat. Thank you very much. I didn't have any Kleenexes to hand at this time. I wish you well, but before we conclude this interview, is there anything you'd like to add, alter or correct in relation to the statement that you've made today?
My overall statement, I would say to anyone thinking of joining the police, it's an unbelievable job. And I spent an unbelievable 30 years doing some amazing, amazing things. And I'd also say to anyone that is in my position who's retired, try not to berate the police. Try and think how you can help it, because it's something you're obviously passionate about. And a lot of people are in that job and they'll moan about it, because we all love a moan, don't we? Everyone loves a moan. But ultimately, they love doing it, which is why they're doing it, else they wouldn't do it.
Exactly.
And it's easy to criticise, but we've got to support the police. That's the biggest thing I'll say to anyone. It's got to be supported. Otherwise, we'll end up with a lawless community. That's the simple. And some people say it's like that now.
But it would get a hell of a lot worse. But, mate, thank you so much for your time today. Enjoy the rest of the day. Enjoy your golf. And I will speak to you when you're older.
Okay, mate. We'll have a game soon, yeah?
Yeah, please do. Please do.
Oh, cool.
And I'll tell Jane that I spoke to you.
Yeah, do that.
All right. Thanks. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Cheers, mate. Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of X Job Downloaded. Please like, follow and share. Your support is invaluable. Thank you.